My parents never even bothered to call me by my real name. To them, I was just the dumb one. That was the label they stamped on me from the time I could barely read. Meanwhile, my brother Ethan was celebrated like he was some kind of royalty. He was the genius, the pride of the Vance family, the one who made it all the way to Harvard on a full scholarship. On his graduation day, my father stood tall in front of hundreds of guests bragging about the empire Ethan would inherit. He promised him the family's $75 million company, a brand new Tesla, and our $13 million mansion in New York. Everyone clapped like it was a coronation. I sat in the back, invisible, humiliated, wondering how I could ever escape the shadow they forced me into. And then it happened. A man I had never seen before stepped up to me. He leaned down, handed me a thick white envelope and whispered into my ear, "It's time to tell them who you really are." In that moment, everything I thought I knew about myself and everything my family believed was about to change. I grew up in a house where love was handed out like trophies, and only my brother Ethan ever won them. From the earliest days, my father, Richard Vance, made it clear who mattered in our family. Ethan was the prodigy, the golden son, the one destined to carry the Vance name into the future. I was the other child, the one who never seemed to fit the mold of perfection they demanded. At family dinners, I always sat in the same chair at the far end of the table. The mahogany surface stretched long between us, with my father at the head, Ethan at his right hand, and my mother Clara close by to beam with pride every time Ethan spoke. By the time I opened my mouth, the conversation had already moved on. I learned that silence was safer than watching their eyes roll. My father had a way of cutting me down with only a few words. I remember one evening when I was 14. Ethan had just announced that he was accepted into an advanced science program. The table erupted with congratulations. My father lifted his glass and said, "That is what it means to be a Vance. Excellence, leadership, brilliance." He turned to me with the faintest smirk. "And you, Aiden, you managed to pass gym class. We should be grateful for small victories." The room laughed. Even my mother, though her laugh was more delicate, as if she knew it was cruel but had grown used to playing along. It hurt in ways I could not explain, not because of the words themselves, but because they never imagined I could be anything more. My mother often whispered comparisons when she thought no one else was listening. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she would say while handing me a plate or passing me a stack of laundry. Her tone was calm, almost casual, but each remark settled into me like a stone sinking deeper into water. Ethan thrived in this environment. He played the role of the perfect son with ease. Tall, sharp-featured, and confident, he carried himself like he already owned the world. He knew he was the favorite and enjoyed reminding me of it. When I was 16, I worked a part-time job at a local diner to save for my own things. One night, as I left for work, Ethan smirked at me from the living room couch where he sat surrounded by our parents' praise. "Don't forget to clean the grease off your hands before you touch the door. We wouldn't want the neighbors to think the Vance family has a servant." My parents laughed as if it was witty, while I walked out the door, pretending it didn't matter. But every comment like that chipped away at me. The only person who saw me differently was my grandfather, Walter Vance. He had founded the family company decades earlier, building it from nothing into the empire my father now ran. Walter was quieter, gentler, a man who believed in people more than profits. Whenever I visited him, he never asked about grades or achievements. He asked about my thoughts, my dreams, and what made me happy. One afternoon, while we sat on his porch, he leaned closer and said, "Aiden, never mistake their blindness for truth. You have something Ethan does not. One day, when the moment comes, you will know it. Do not let them convince you otherwise." His words stayed with me, though I never fully understood them. To me, I was just the forgotten son, surviving in the shadows of a family that measured worth by trophies and headlines. Life at home felt like a competition I was never allowed to win. My father trained Ethan like a soldier for greatness. He brought him into board meetings as a teenager, let him shadow business deals, and told every guest at our house that Ethan was the future of the Vance legacy. I was never invited to those meetings. Instead, I was told to mow the lawn, run errands, or stay out of sight. It was as if my existence was an inconvenience, something to be managed rather than celebrated. The older we got, the more the gap between us widened. Ethan's acceptance to Harvard was treated like a national holiday in our household. My mother threw a party that very evening, complete with a catered dinner and champagne. Strangers congratulated me, assuming I must be proud. But behind the polite smiles, I felt invisible, as though I had no identity outside of being Ethan's brother. I was 19 when I realized I could not rely on my parents for love or validation. I started working multiple part-time jobs, saving quietly, building small pieces of independence they never acknowledged. While Ethan returned from his summers abroad with stories of Europe, I spent mine stacking boxes in warehouses and washing dishes. My parents dismissed my work as wasted time, never realizing it gave me strength they had never imagined. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed down every time we gathered as a family. My father's words echoed in my head. "Aiden, you will never amount to anything." My mother's sighs followed me down hallways. Ethan's laughter reminded me of how effortless his life seemed compared to mine. By the time his graduation approached, I'd already braced myself for the humiliation I knew was coming. It was never a question of if they would favor him again, but how public and painful they would make it. I prepared myself to sit in silence to swallow my pride while they celebrated Ethan as the crown jewel of the Vance family. What I did not know was that the life they had forced me to accept, the one filled with shadows and shame, was about to collide with a truth that would shake the entire family. I had no idea that the envelope waiting for me that day would prove my grandfather's words right, and that my silence would not last forever. The day of Ethan's graduation was a performance from the moment I woke up. My parents treated it as if it were more important than any holiday or milestone we had ever celebrated. My mother, Clara, rushed through the house, giving orders to the staff about floral arrangements, catering deliveries, and the guest list. My father, Richard, stood in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks, already rehearsing the speech he would give to the hundreds of guests who had been invited. I had no role in this day other than to sit quietly. My suit was one of Ethan's old ones, tailored to fit me only slightly, and my seat at the ceremony had been assigned in the far back rows. I watched from a distance as Ethan crossed the stage, his gown flowing, his name announced to roaring applause. My parents stood to clap while my father's chest swelled with pride. I clapped too, though my hands felt heavy, my stomach twisted in knots. After the ceremony, the real spectacle began. Our family hosted a grand reception in a New York ballroom lit with chandeliers and filled with polished wood floors that reflected the glow of golden lights. Valets lined the entrance where luxury cars pulled in one after another. Guests from the business world, politicians, and family friends arrived dressed in tuxedos and gowns. They all came not just to celebrate Ethan's graduation, but to witness the official announcement of his inheritance. I tried to stay invisible. I stood near the back wall, half hidden behind tall vases of white lilies. My presence felt like an afterthought, a courtesy at best. People who brushed past me barely nodded. Some whispered, "That must be the other son," as if I were a footnote to the story they were really here to see. Then came the moment I had been dreading. My father climbed to the stage with a microphone in his hand, his voice booming across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to honor my brilliant son, Ethan Vance." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ethan, standing near the front, grinned with a confidence that had been fed to him his entire life. Richard continued, his tone growing more grand with every word. "As many of you know, the Vance family has built more than just a company. We have built a legacy. Tonight I am proud to announce that Ethan will not only carry our name forward, but will inherit the very foundation of what we have created. The company valued at $75 million, the new Tesla Model X parked outside, and the $13 million mansion in New York will all belong to him. He is the future of our family, and I could not be prouder." The room erupted again. Glasses clinked, cheers filled the air, and the sound of celebration surrounded me. I stayed in my chair at the back, my heart sinking lower with every cheer. My mother leaned into my father's side, smiling with satisfaction, her hand resting on his arm as if to say, "We did it. Our perfect son has everything." For a brief moment, my eyes met Ethan's. He lifted his champagne glass toward me, but not in a gesture of inclusion. His smirk was sharp, mocking as if he were toasting my failure. Message in his eyes was clear. I had lost, He had won. I wanted to disappear, to vanish from that room where I felt like nothing more than a shadow. The humiliation pressed down on me heavier than ever. I thought of the years I had worked unnoticed, the nights I spent alone believing maybe, just maybe, they would see me differently someday. But with those words from my father, that dream was destroyed in front of everyone. As the crowd cheered for Ethan, my mother walked past me on her way toward the stage. She stopped just long enough to whisper in a voice sharp enough to cut, "At least don't ruin this day for your brother. Keep to yourself." Then she was gone, smiling again as she reached for Ethan's hand. The speeches continued. The toasts grew louder and I remained rooted in my chair. I clenched my fists beneath the table, trying to hold myself together. Rage mixed with sorrow in my chest, a storm I could not show anyone. I thought of my grandfather, Walter, the only one who had ever spoken to me as if I mattered. His words echoed again in my head, "One day the truth will set you free." But what truth? To me there was only this reality. My parents had chosen their favorite, and my brother had won the crown. I was the forgotten son, the embarrassment seated in the shadows while the rest of the family basked in golden light. The conflict that had defined my entire life had never been clearer. I was not just excluded, I had been erased. My father had announced it to the world, and the applause that followed felt like nails sealing a coffin. In that moment, I believed I would always remain silent, that I would endure this day as I had endured every insult, every whisper, and every cruel laugh. What I did not know was that this very night would deliver something I had never expected. It was when the applause finally began to settle, when the music started to play again, that I noticed a man in a dark suit moving toward me through the crowd. He was not clapping. He was not smiling. He carried something in his hand and his eyes were fixed on me alone. The man moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd as if none of the laughter, music, or celebration mattered to him. His gaze locked on me, steady and unflinching, and I felt the air shift before he even reached my table. He was tall, with sharp features, and an expression that revealed nothing. When he stopped beside me, he bent slightly, slid a thick white envelope onto the table, and whispered into my ear with a voice low and deliberate, "It's time to tell them who you really are." Before I could respond, he straightened his jacket, gave the smallest nod, and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. I sat frozen, staring at the envelope resting against the polished wood. My fingers trembled as they hovered above it. For years I had been dismissed, mocked, and silenced, but never had anyone suggested there was more to me than what my family had declared. I pressed the envelope against my lap, shielding it from view. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I considered leaving right then, slipping out before anyone noticed, but the man's words repeated in my head. Who I really am. What could that possibly mean? The speeches on stage continued. Ethan was now standing with my father, smiling broadly while guests congratulated them both. Their voices blurred together as my attention narrowed on the sealed envelope. I slid a finger beneath the flap and hesitated. Part of me feared it was a cruel trick, another way for fate to humiliate me. But another part, the part that still carried my grandfather's words, urged me forward. I tore the seal and opened it. Inside were several documents bound together along with a folded handwritten letter. The documents bore official stamps and signatures. My eyes raced across the first page and my breath caught when I saw my name written. Clearly, not as an afterthought, not in mockery, but in legal recognition. The shares of the Vance Company, the trust that controlled the New York mansion, and accounts I had never heard of, were all listed under me. Aeron Vance. The final page contained a transfer of authority signed years earlier by my grandfather Walter himself. My hands shook harder. I unfolded the letter and saw my grandfather's handwriting, familiar and steady. Aiden, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. I watched both you and Ethan grow, and I knew early on that the future of this family could not rest on arrogance or pride. I chose you because you understand humility, because you know what it is to endure without recognition, and because you see people for who they are rather than what they can give you. Do not doubt yourself any longer. Everything I built belongs to you. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My grandfather had chosen me, not Ethan, not my father, not the version of perfection my family worshipped. For years I had believed their cruelty defined my worth. But here was proof that the man who started it all had seen me differently. My chest tightened with a mix of disbelief and defiance. I wanted to leap up and shout the truth, but fear held me in place. My father stood at the front of the room, his voice full of authority, his reputation glowing brighter than the chandeliers above him. If I interrupted him, if I dared to challenge his announcement, the backlash could be crushing. The Vance family name was power, and Richard Vance had spent a lifetime protecting it with intimidation and control. But then I thought of every moment that had led me here. My father's smirk when he called me useless. My mother's whispers that I was nothing compared to Ethan. My brother's cruel jokes disguised as wit. The years of silence I had endured, hoping for the smallest scrap of approval. For too long I had let them decide who I was. The envelope in my hands was more than paper. It was freedom. I closed the folder and tucked it inside my jacket, pressing it firmly against my chest. The decision crystallized within me. I would not stay silent. Not this time. I would not let my father's voice drown mine out any longer. The music softened as another toast began. Glasses raised in Ethan's honor, cheers echoing through the room. I rose slowly from my seat, my legs unsteady, but my resolve solid. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than the weight of their judgment. As I made my way toward the stage, a few heads turned, curious. My father noticed me approaching and frowned, clearly displeased at the interruption. Ethan smirked, assuming I was there to congratulate him publicly, to play my usual role of silent shadow. My mother shook her head subtly, her eyes sharp with warning, but my grandfather's words rang in my mind. One day the truth will set you free. This was that day. I climbed the steps to the stage, my pulse racing, my hands clenched at my sides. Richard leaned toward the microphone, attempting to usher me away with a forced smile. "Ethan, this is not your moment," he muttered under his breath. But I stood my ground. My voice, though trembling at first, grew stronger with every word. "Actually, Father, this moment belongs to me." The room fell into silence. Guests froze mid-toast, glasses suspended in the air. Brian's grin faltered. My father's eyes narrowed with fury, and I reached into my jacket, gripping the envelope that carried the truth my family had never wanted to see. The silence in the room was heavier than any sound. Hundreds of eyes locked on me as I stood at the edge of the stage, holding the envelope against my chest. My father's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "Ethan, step down. You're embarrassing yourself." For years I had obeyed commands like that without question. For years I had shrunk back into the shadows when told I did not belong. But not this time. My hand trembled as I pulled the papers from inside my jacket and held them high enough for everyone to see. "I'm not the one embarrassing myself," I said, my voice carrying farther than I thought possible. "You are," gasps rippled through the crowd. Brian laughed nervously, raising his glass again. "What are you doing? Sit down before you make a fool of yourself." I opened the envelope and unfolded the documents. The Harrington Company's seal shimmered under the ballroom lights. "These are signed transfer agreements from Walter Harrington," I said, my voice steadying. "He chose me, not you, Brian. He chose me, not you, Father. The company, the mansion, the accounts, all of it was placed in my name years ago." The room erupted into a mixture of whispers and stunned silence. Some guests leaned forward, craning their necks to see. Others exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe me. Richard lunged toward me, his face flushed with rage. "This is ridiculous. That old man must have been confused. He didn't know what he was doing when he signed those." But before he could rip the papers from my hand, a firm voice cut through the chaos. I knew exactly what I was doing. The crowd turned as my grandfather, Walter Harrington, slowly rose from a chair near the front. His cane tapped against the polished floor with each step he took toward the stage. Though his body had aged, his presence commanded more authority than anyone in the room. When he reached me, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "I gave these papers to a man I trusted to deliver them when the time was right. That time is now. I chose Ethan because I watched both of my grandsons grow. Brian, you have brilliance, but brilliance without humility becomes arrogance. Richard, you built wealth, but you lost compassion. Ethan has endured neglect and cruelty, yet he has not hardened his heart. He will lead because he knows the value of every person, not just the powerful." The room erupted again, this time with louder gasps and murmurs. Brian's face turned pale as the smirk drained away. "Grandfather, you can't be serious," he stammered. "I've done everything to make you proud. I've achieved more than Ethan ever could." Walter looked at him with sadness, not anger. "You achieved for yourself, Brian, not for others. That is not leadership. That is vanity." Richard turned on his father, his voice rising with desperation. "You would give everything to the boy who failed, to the one who never lived up to the Harrington name." Walter's reply cut through him like steel. "I am giving everything to the man who redefines what the Harrington name means." The crowd fell completely silent. The chandeliers seemed to flicker with the weight of the words. For the first time in my life, I felt the power of being seen. Truly seen, not as a disappointment, but as the rightful heir to something greater than wealth. I turned toward the audience, my hands no longer shaking. All my life I was told I was nothing, that I was worthless, that I would never measure up. Tonight you've heard my father declare it again, but you also see the truth in my hands. My grandfather believed in me when no one else did. I won't waste what he entrusted me with. I will honor this family's legacy in a way that builds people, not just profits. Guests began clapping hesitantly at first, then stronger. The sound spread through the room until it drowned out the silence that had suffocated me for years. My father's face burned red with fury, but he had no words left. My mother's lips trembled, her perfect smile gone. Brian stood frozen, his glass still raised as if time had abandoned him. The stranger who had delivered the envelope appeared again at the back of the room, watching quietly, then gave me a single nod before stepping away. Whoever he was, he had been the bridge between my grandfather's promise and this moment of truth. I felt a rush of clarity. This was not just about inheritance or wealth. This was about breaking free from the chains my family had wrapped around me since childhood. The humiliation, the cruelty, the years of silence, all of it had led to this night where I could finally stand and speak without shame. I faced my grandfather and bowed my head slightly. "Thank you for believing in me." He squeezed my shoulder. "Now show them why I was right." When I looked back at the crowd, I no longer saw strangers staring at the family's failure. I saw witnesses to my transformation. I saw the end of the story they had always told about me, and the beginning of the one I would write myself. For the first time, Brian lowered his eyes, unable to hold mine. The smirk was gone, replaced by something he had never felt toward me before, fear. And in that ballroom, under the glare of the chandeliers, I realized the truth. I had never been the dumb one. I had only been waiting for the right moment to show them who I really was. The applause faded into murmurs as the weight of what had just happened settled over the ballroom. My father's hands clenched at his sides, his voice low and bitter. "This is not the end. You have no idea what you're getting into, Ethan." He turned sharply and stormed out, his polished shoes striking the floor like gunshots. My mother followed, her eyes avoiding mine, her face pale beneath the layers of makeup. She had spent her entire life building the image of a perfect family, and in one night, it had shattered in front of everyone she sought to impress. Brian stayed rooted where he stood, shoulders stiff, fists trembling around the stem of his glass. He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage, as if I had stolen something he had already claimed as his birthright. "You don't deserve this," he hissed. "You're nothing compared to me." I met his eyes without flinching. For the first time, I did not shrink beneath his words. "Maybe I'm not what you think I should be, but I am what grandfather believes I can be." That's more than enough. The look on his face told me the truth he could not admit. He was afraid. Afraid because the foundation of his superiority had just crumbled. My grandfather stood taller than I had seen him in years. He leaned on his cane, but his voice carried strength. "This family will change starting tonight. The company is in good hands. And for once, those hands belong to someone who knows the cost of being overlooked. Ethan, the burden is yours now, but it is also your gift." Those words sank into me with a weight that was both terrifying and liberating. I knew the path ahead would not be easy. Running a company worth millions was more responsibility than I had ever imagined. But for the first time, I believed I could rise to the challenge, not because I wanted to prove my father wrong or humiliate my brother, but because I wanted to honor the faith my grandfather had placed in me. The guests slowly began to applaud again, this time not for Brian or Richard, but for me. The sound filled the room like a tide washing away years of silence. My chest lifted as I stood taller, no longer hiding in the shadows of my family. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the chandeliers dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool New York air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, glowing against the dark. For years I had looked at those lights as symbols of a world that belonged to everyone but me. Now they felt different. They felt like a promise of something I had finally earned. I thought of the boy I had been sitting at the end of the table, mocked and dismissed. I thought of the countless nights I believed their words, believing I truly was nothing. And I thought of the man I was becoming, standing here with the truth in my hands, free at last from the cage they had built around me. The lesson was clear. Being underestimated does not define your worth. Sometimes the cruelest judgments prepare you to lead with strength no one expects. The labels others place on you do not determine your future. What matters is the truth you carry within yourself and the courage to stand when the moment arrives. My grandfather joined me outside, resting his hand on my shoulder. "You see now, don't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," I answered. "I see it clearly." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "Then carry it well. The future is yours." I breathed in deeply, letting the night air fill my lungs. The fear, the shame, the years of being invisible, they no longer held me. I was not the dumb one. I was the heir chosen not because of perfection, but because of resilience, because of heart, because of the strength forged in silence. And to those watching, listening to my story, I have something to say. If you've ever been called less, if you've ever been mocked or pushed aside, remember this moment. Your worth is not defined by the voices that try to bury you. Your time will come, and when it does, the truth will speak louder than any insult ever could. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me what part resonated most with you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel.